The town square was usually quiet in the early morning. Shopkeepers lifted their shutters slowly, sweeping dust from the front steps, while the smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery on the corner. Children chased each other near the fountain, their laughter echoing through the narrow streets. Nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary in this place, until that day. A long, black car rolled into the square, its polished surface reflecting the morning light. It moved too slowly, too deliberately, as if its driver wanted everyone to notice. Conversations hushed. Shopkeepers leaned on their door frames, eyes fixed on the unfamiliar vehicle. The children stopped playing, clinging to their mother's skirts. When the car finally stopped, its engine rumbled for a moment before shutting off. The door opened with a creak, and out stepped a man in a dark coat, holding a sealed envelope tightly in his gloved hand. His presence carried weight. He didn't need to speak for people to feel that something important had arrived with him. He glanced once around the square, meeting the eyes of curious onlookers, then turned sharply and began walking toward the mayor's office. The sound of his footsteps echoed against the cobblestones, each step carrying an air of finality, as though his arrival marked the beginning of something the town could never undo. Inside the mayor's office, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and polished brass. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the desk where the stranger placed the sealed envelope. The mayor, a broad man with gray at his temples, looked at it with unease. He had been in power for years, and little ever startled him, but this envelope did. The wax seal was marked with an unfamiliar crest, one that no one in the room could recognize. The mayor hesitated before breaking it, as though he already knew that opening it would unleash something far bigger than he could control. With a heavy sigh, he tore it open. Inside were faded photographs, brittle with age, and several documents typed on yellowing paper. His hands trembled as he spread them across the desk. The first photograph showed a group of men in suits, standing proudly in front of a newly constructed building decades ago. But what caught his breath was the face among them, his own, younger, standing beside people he had sworn never to speak of again. The documents revealed transactions, deals made in the shadows, and secrets carefully buried under years of silence. Each line he read tightened the knot in his chest. These weren't just personal mistakes, they were truths that could unravel the entire foundation of his leadership. Outside the office, whispers had already begun. The townsfolk who saw the stranger enter were restless, their curiosity feeding on itself. By the time the mayor looked up from the damning papers, it was too late. News was spreading like wildfire, faster than he could contain it. The secrets that had stayed hidden for decades were now at the brink of exposure, ready to shake the town to its core. The town, once a place of easy smiles and familiar greetings, began to feel different overnight. At the cafe near the square, where laughter and the clinking of coffee cups had always filled the air, silence settled like a heavy fog. Neighbors who once shared tables now sat apart, their eyes darting but never meeting. The old comfort of friendship was eroding, replaced by suspicion. People whispered in hushed tones. Some said the mayor was a traitor who had stolen from them for years. Others insisted the documents were lies, planted to destroy him. Even families felt the strain. Dinners turned into tense affairs where arguments broke out over who was right, who was guilty, and whether the town's foundation had been built on truth or deceit. One afternoon, two lifelong friends, Samuel and David, crossed paths at the marketplace. For years they had worked side by side, fixing roofs and building fences, but now their conversation was sharp, their words heavy. "You believe all this nonsense?" Samuel snapped, gripping a basket of apples too tightly. David's face hardened. "It isn't nonsense. You saw the papers. You think they're forged." Samuel shook his head, though his voice faltered. "The mayor built this town up. We owe him everything." David leaned closer, eyes burning with anger. "We owe him nothing if it was built on lies." Their exchange ended with silence, but the damage was done. Samuel turned away without another word, and the distance between them seemed impossible to close. The town's heart was splitting into two, those who clung to loyalty, and those who demanded truth. And with each passing day, the fracture deepened, leaving behind an uneasy quiet where trust once lived. The community hall was packed to the brim, its wooden benches creaking under the weight of restless bodies. The air inside was hot, thick with sweat and anticipation. Every corner of the room buzzed with tension, conversations clashing like the low rumble of an approaching storm. The stranger who had delivered the envelope was nowhere to be seen, but his presence lingered like a ghost in every anxious whisper. At the front stood the mayor, his once commanding posture now stiff and uncertain. He tried to speak, but the roar of the crowd swallowed his words. Angry voices rose one after another. "You lied to us," shouted a woman clutching her child. "You built your power on betrayal," yelled a farmer, his fists clenched tight. Others demanded explanations, their faces red with fury, their eyes filled with betrayal. The mayor slammed his hand on the podium, his booming voice finally cutting through the noise. "Enough," he barked, but instead of silence, his words fueled the fire. More accusations poured in, about land deals, missing funds, and decisions made in the shadows of secrecy. Suddenly, an elderly man pushed forward from the crowd, holding one of the photographs from the envelope high above his head. "We trusted you," he cried, his voice cracking. "But this proves everything." The room erupted. People surged to their feet, fists pounding tables, voices overlapping in a deafening storm. A few tried to calm the crowd, but their efforts were drowned out. The mayor's allies shouted back, defending his legacy, insisting the documents had been twisted out of context. The hall became a battlefield of words, truth and lies tangled in a violent struggle. In the chaos, one thing became clear: the town would never return to the quiet days of shared trust. The secrets were out, and they could not be shoved back into the dark. What had been hidden for decades now stood bare in the light, dividing neighbor from neighbor, friend from friend. Night fell heavy over the town, but no one slept. Windows glowed with candlelight, and voices carried through the narrow streets. The community had splintered so deeply that even silence felt dangerous. In the mayor's office, the documents lay spread across the table like poisonous roots, their words creeping into every household, every conversation. The longer they remained, the more power they seemed to hold. It was then that a young resident, barely 20, stepped forward during a late gathering in the square. His name was Elias, known to most as a quiet helper in the bookshop, not someone who sought attention. Yet his voice rang clear as he faced the divided crowd. "Look at us," he said, his tone steady but pained. "We've torn each other apart over papers that none of us can change. Families won't speak, friends won't meet, and our streets are colder than ever before. These secrets, real or false, they've already done their damage. The question is, do we let them keep poisoning us?" Murmurs rose in the crowd. Some nodded, others glared. A few scoffed at the suggestion. Elias lifted the bundle of documents for everyone to see. "What if we destroy them? Burn them, let the past die and give ourselves the chance to live again? If we keep them, this war between us will never end." Gasps echoed through the square. An elderly woman clutched her chest in disbelief, while a group of young men shouted angrily, accusing Elias of cowardice. "The truth matters," one cried. "You'd rather live in ignorance than face what was done to us." The square erupted into argument once more, but now the stakes felt sharper. To keep the documents meant choosing truth, no matter how painful. To destroy them meant choosing peace, but at the cost of erasing history. And as Elias held the papers tightly to his chest, all eyes turned to him, waiting, wondering, if he would truly dare to erase the truth for the sake of unity. The dawn was quiet, a thin veil of mist curling over the rooftops as the townsfolk gathered once again in the square. No one spoke much, the arguments from the night before still clung to their voices. Faces were tired, lined with anger, fear, and sorrow. Yet everyone came, because they knew the moment had arrived, the decision that would shape their future. In the center of the square stood a small iron fire pit, its surface cold and waiting. Elias approached slowly, the bundle of documents pressed against his chest. The crowd parted as he passed, some reaching out as if to stop him, others stepping back as though afraid to touch the choice he carried. The mayor stood nearby, his face pale, his eyes shadowed by regret. He did not speak. Perhaps he had nothing left to defend, or perhaps he too waited to see what the people would choose. Elias placed the documents into the pit. His hands trembled. Around him, voices broke out. "Don't do it," someone cried. "Let the truth live," shouted another. Others begged, "End this, Elias. We need peace." The young man's jaw tightened. He struck a match, holding the tiny flame between his fingers. For a heartbeat, it flickered uncertainly, just like the town's hope. Then, with a sharp breath, he dropped it onto the pile. The fire caught quickly, curling the edges of the papers, turning secrets into smoke. Gasps filled the air as faces lit up in the glow, some in grief, others in relief. The crowd fell silent, watching the past burn away piece by piece. When the last ash crumbled, nothing remained but a faint trail of smoke rising into the morning sky. People turned to one another, but their expressions were unreadable. Some wept quietly, mourning the truth that would never be spoken again. Others placed hands on their neighbors' shoulders, as if hoping that without the documents, the fractures between them could heal. Elias stood still, his eyes on the ashes. He knew what he had done could never be undone. The truth was gone, but the scars it left remained. As the sun broke through the mist, one thing was certain: the town would never return to what it once was. Whether it would rebuild stronger or remain forever divided, only time would tell.